Hello everyone, Mr. Lapeze here with a brainstorming video for our first major essay of the semester. Typically I will make a video like this for the major assignments across the semester. So a brainstorming exercise via video probably will be coming your way for essay number 2 and number 3 as well. And then if time allows and if we need it, I'll make another video for the final exam documents. So just some thoughts on how to approach our first essay of the semester. One thing to keep in mind is the paper is a definition paper. That's, your essays have strategies. One might be a compare-contrast, one might be a cause and effect, one might be a problem solution. This essay is a definition paper. And the term I'm asking you to define across the 3+ full pages is salvation. In other words, what does salvation mean? Very simply, you might come up with a term, a phrase like to be saved. Before you get into the aspects of being saved, sort of physically or emotionally or spiritually, any of that stuff, at this fundamental level, you might think of just being saved, being helped out. That's what salvation means. And one place you might go from there is, what does it mean to be saved? What are the elements involved? And typically, at least, being saved or being helped involves something to be helped from, saved from, a threat, and something to do the helping, something to do the saving, a savior. And that's a very fundamental start. Of course, you can put this in your own words and define it how you want. But one thing to keep in mind is that when I ask you for a definition of a term, what you're not doing is consulting Google or dictionary.com or a physical dictionary. I want your own subjective definition of the word salvation. And then in the prompt, what I ask you to consider in your definition, your broad definition of salvation, are the various types. And I ask you to at least consider these two: earthly salvation and spiritual salvation. And there's other types, and if you want to touch on more, go for it. If you want to stick to those two mentioned in the prompt, that's fine too. But what I want us all to talk about in our definition over 3+ full pages are these sort of different ideas of being saved in an earthly sense, in the sense of the type of saving that involves our senses, our sense of smell and taste and touch, etc. And then the other type of salvation I mentioned in the prompt, a spiritual type, one that involves the supernatural or supernatural elements, the type that many of us go to initially when we think salvation, that belongs to religion and spirituality. So how do those two earthly and salvation types of salvation, how do they compare, how do they contrast, how do they clash as sort of like micro definitions within the broader definition of salvation? And so on these notes, I have some examples, things you might consider, and of course you can add to this list in any way you deem necessary. But some examples of earthly threats, things that sort of put you in a position to need to be saved. Just examples: a house fire, a flood, a rip current at the beach, earthquake, addiction, depression, a virus such as COVID or the influenza virus, war, things that we can take pictures of, and we can see that they are, we can look at it under a microscope, and we can see that they are threats to human existence, to human happiness, to health. And then some examples of earthly saviors, sort of like the things, the people that counteract those threats in an earthly sense, such as first responders, friends, family, nurses, physicians, vaccines, masks, lifeguards, soldiers, the people and the things that do the saving, that do the helping out when an example of salvation is playing out. And then on the other hand, examples of spiritual salvation. These are the things that, when you're thinking of religion and spirituality, that belong in a list of potential harm. Things such as eternal damnation, eternal punishment, hell, a hellish afterlife, the devil, demons. Obviously, things that we don't typically consider experiential, that we don't see and take pictures of and be able to smell and taste and hear. But through faith, many times people believe that these things exist. And then examples to counteract those spiritual types of threats: higher powers, angels, prayer. Depending on how you argue, you might be able to put some sort of a priest or a priestess on this list. In other words, in examples of spiritual salvation, what is doing the saving? That's the stuff that belongs down here. And so what I'm asking you to do is define salvation broadly, narrow it down to different types of salvation, and then in your body paragraphs, you will talk about the different types. Here's some questions that I would consider for sure if I were writing this paper. Once I sort of got my thesis statement directly responding to the prompt, in other words, your thesis should be just a very specific definition of the term salvation. Usually you can accomplish that in 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 sentences at most. A very specific, direct response to the prompt. So what is salvation specifically? I would break my body paragraphs down into each type of salvation I want to discuss in depth. I would touch on the threats, saviors, give examples, make arguments for what they are and why they belong to that type of salvation. And then I would for sure consider more complex questions, such as where do the different types of threats and saviors overcome? Or do they? And if they can't, why not? So maybe a question like number 1, can a spiritual threat ever be overcome by an earthly savior? In other words, is there ever an instance where we might reach from this list a first responder, a friend, a family, vaccine, mask, lifeguard, soldier, this sort of earthly savior list to counteract some sort of spiritual threat, the threat of eternal punishment or eternal damnation or hell, or something that belongs to the supernatural category, but that is a threat to people? Would we ever resort to asking someone of the earth or something of the earth to intercede on our behalf? And if that's possible, how? If not, why not? That sort of thing. And conversely, number 2, can an earthly threat be overcome by our spiritual savior? And this is a very common idea. Earthly threat. An example right now, let's call it a hurricane is bearing down on North Carolina. Many people will say, please God, or please whoever out there, keep this thing from harming me and my family. Does that work? What are your thoughts on that? How is that possible? Why do people resort to pleading for earthly salvation from a spiritual savior? What are your thoughts on that? Of course, I would talk about the similarities and differences between the different types of threats and saviors. You know, how does a higher power such as God or gods compare to the actions and the power of a first responder or friends or family or vaccine or soldiers during wartime? These types of saviors are quite different. How do they compare and contrast? Same thing for threats. And then I would ask myself, what other types of salvation are there? There's this sort of supernatural realm that belongs to religion and spirituality. There is the earthly realm that's sort of just logical and does not rely on faith at all, but can be proven. Where might something like superstition come into play? Superstition is sort of this blurry space for many of us between spirituality and logic, where we have an actual earthly thing, a lucky horseshoe, a lucky pair of socks, a lucky rabbit's foot, but we expect supernatural things of this object. We expect the rabbit's foot to give us good luck. We expect our lucky pair of socks to help us or our team win the game. How how does that potentially fit into this, at least, dichotomy so far of spiritual and earthly salvation? So very, very basically, what you're doing is a thesis statement that is a 1 to 3 sentence specific response to the prompt, what is salvation? And then I want you to, throughout your body paragraphs, talk about the different types of salvation, get specific, make sure you have claims, arguments, and examples. And then I want you to really put on your critical thinking cap and your creativity cap and take on some of these types of questions. Where do the lines blur between different types of salvation? Why do they blur? And if there's a stark line between certain types of threats or saviors, why is that line so stark? What distinguishes different types of threats and saviors according to you, and why? Final note, make sure you read all of the essay guidelines on the prompt carefully. We are reading a few readings, the Hudson, the Berminian Rice, and the Langston Hughes piece during our work on this essay, but we are only reading them just to sort of get our brains wrapped around the topic. Essay number 1 is the only essay this semester where we are not using outside material. So no quotes, no paraphrase, no summary. You will have no works cited page. You cannot borrow from anything else. You can't borrow from the Bible or any other spiritual text. You cannot borrow from a dictionary, no Webster's, no Merriam-Webster.com, whatever. Everything on essay number 1 needs to be from you in your own words, in your own terms. Okay? Those readings are just to sort of give us examples of other people who have considered these topics: salvation, spiritual salvation, logical sort of earthly salvation. We are not quoting from them. We're not referencing them whatsoever. Otherwise, nuts and bolts, make sure you get your formatting correct. There's a sample essay in Blackboard under Getting Started, and of course resources. Make sure if you're someone who struggles with writing, you by all means reach out to places that can help you, such as the Real Center, contact Student Experience Program people, use the ILC. And of course, you can always ask me questions, email me. I'm happy to help. I can't grade your paper ahead of time, but what I can do is answer specific questions and give you an idea if you're on the right track or if you're veering off a little bit, and give you some, hopefully, some strategies and tactics to get you in the right place. Otherwise, y'all, best of luck. Let me know if I can help. And as always, I look forward to reading what you write. Bye.